So Sony during the week released, and they promised they would do this, which I thought was kind of a bit odd, but they promised that they'd do an official teardown of the PS5,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what they did, and it was quite mesmerizing, really. Like, I don't know if you've watched it.
I did, yeah.
But it's just, yeah, it's pretty relaxing, and look, the console looks ridiculously huge.
Oh, it's
it
massive.
looks so big.
So let me just quickly butt in. I recently got into small form factor PCs. Not like the current one that I have, I wouldn't call it a super proper small form factor. I'm using the H210, the NZXT H210 case, which is pretty big for an ITX case, but it's still only, accepts an ITX motherboard. Compared to my old PC, it's tiny. Takes way less desk space. And I recently also got my hands on a Cooler Master NR4 200, which is more in line with proper small form factor PCs. And now I'm at that stage where I highly doubt I will ever go to a big case again. I just don't see the point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not to go into a whole rabbit hole.
How do you fit in like a 3080 in those though?
You can fit them in a lot of them. Yeah, a lot of them
Really?
have no issues fitting them. I mean, it's a lot more fiddly, especially if you want to do water cooling and stuff as well. Some cases just won't work properly. Some cases you're going to have issues being able to put a radiator and a graphics card in at the same time. It's fiddly. But I mean, I've tested a few different cards. For example, in the one that I have, the H210, my 2070 wouldn't fit. It wasn't the length that was the problem; it was actually the height. Because it's the girth, exactly. 5 inches, but it's thick.
Yeah. Go on.
Hey, you started it. And yeah, my 2070 wouldn't fit into it, so I actually had to move to a different case after that as well. But I still wouldn't go back. I just think at least personally, the benefits of having a much smaller case that takes up way less room on my desk far outweighs, the benefits of being able to, I don't know, have an extra PCIe slot that I never ever used in the past. I only ever had one graphics card on my motherboard, and that's basically it. I run an M.2 drive for the OS and a bunch of other things, and then a separate drive for gaming. So
I don't think it would work for me because I've got already one capture card, and I was thinking about getting another thing in there.
You'd have to go USB or something.
The PS5 would be bigger than.
So here's the thing, right? The PS5 is now bigger than my PC.
That's mad.
And it's weird. Everything's completely turned upside down because traditionally consoles were much smaller. And definitely the Xbox One X is way smaller than any PC that I have. And I actually think it's amazing from, even the Xbox One, and of course the new series, the amount of performance they cram into those things, especially now that I've had more experience trying to cram that level of performance into a small form factor PC, actually blows me away. The engineering and the design is amazing. It really is. And I know it's all custom-made stuff. It's different than, having standardized parts that you need to piece into your own case, like a little puzzle. But it's just amazing. Like, kudos to the engineers that create those things. But yeah, now I have no doubt that console, looking at the specs of the size and stuff, is bigger than my actual PC. At least, in height and stuff. It's probably not as fat, but yeah, it's nuts. I don't even know where I'm going to put it, to be honest. I don't have room in my cabinet for it or anything, so.
Well, and, from my perspective, I think both of these consoles, they just look terrible on their side. Like, they look like they're definitely designed to be upright. I think they're designed to
definitely
be upright.
Definitely the PlayStation at the very
least,
yeah.
Perspective.
And thermally as well, yeah.
No, but the Xbox looks horrible because you've got the little logo, and as far as we understand, it's fixed. So if you put it on the side, it's off by 90 degrees.
Yeah, but I mean, come on.
Which would just
in theory, that would drive you nuts, but after a while, you're not going to care. It's the same as having RGB on your PC. I don't know, people are gonna hate me for saying this, and hey, I'm a fan of RGB. I have to admit,
you got a lot of RGB on your PC.
But what happens is I spend a ton of time setting it up, making sure it's perfect, colors match, it's in sync, all that jazz, and then a week later I turn it all off because it's distracting. I don't really care about it. It's electricity.
Crazy.
So It's kind of the
What's
same
the
thing. Honestly, if an Xbox button is going to piss you off because it's 90 degrees off, you might want to reconsider the things that, trigger you in life.
Unacceptable. I'm allowed to be pissed about
Literally
it.
unplayable, huh?
It's literally unplayable. And the other one about the Xbox, I know we were going all over the place. Yeah. I didn't realize that the top bit with the mesh.
Yeah.
I thought that was like a light or like a subtle, like a light, but maybe not super bright, but it's illuminated. But I didn't realize that green part is just painted on.
I didn't realize that either. Holy moly.
That's just paint.
Interesting.
Like that's just coloring. I was like, kind of feels a bit tacky. Everyone says it looks good.
I probably would look good.
It feels a bit tacky to me.
Yeah.
So it's just going back to the PS5 teardown. Yeah. Like the things that stood out to me is the sort of liquid metal cooling, which hasn't really been done in production as far as we've seen before.
Well, certainly not in consoles or anything. I don't even know any PCs on the market that have that. It's always been what I thought.
I'm not aware of it in the consumer space. No.
Yeah. The only thing about it, so I've used HEATSINK compound on all the PC builds that I have, and unfortunately I've had to tear it down and pull apart and rebuild the PCs that I've done over the last few months, probably 20 times now. Fortunately, I haven't once forgotten to apply thermal paste. And on that note, actually, I'll just quickly interject. I was playing the PC building simulator on Steam yesterday, I think it was. And I'm playing it, and I'm building this cool custom water build just to fiddle around with it. And this achievement pops up. I'm like, what is that? And it was an achievement for forgetting to apply thermal paste before assembling everything. Like, rookie mistake. So anyway, with liquid metal, I don't personally use it, but I've seen stuff about it. Gamers Nexus did quite a good teardown about it, and quite a few videos on it, and they use it. I think they used it on their overclocking for the recent SLI 3080 or 3090 videos that they did to try to get the high benchmark scores. And I find, at least personally, it's very fiddly, because it is conductive. So if you screw up and you don't cover the parts correctly and it spills over, you could short your entire chip. Whereas, with normal thermal compound, you can slap it on and it's not really going to do anything too bad, other than it just gets messy, really. But the fact that they use it in the PlayStation is interesting. And I don't know what the life expectancy of using liquid metal is on parts like that. I know generally the people that I've seen kind of apply it and they remove it and put it back on sometimes after a prolonged period of time. I don't know enough about it, so I can't comment whether that would be an issue or not compared to just standard thermal compound. But I would imagine if Sony applied it, surely it's probably fine, for a long term.
I feel like this is one of the things that Sony does that, whenever they launch a console, they'll often have stuff in the console that is only in the first generation, and then they remove it in subsequent generations.
Yeah, that's
so like with the PS3, they had basically almost like a PS2 within there.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the 40 gig one. Yeah, that had proper hardware. Yeah, that everyone wanted. It was like
hardware emulation,
$1,000 more,
and they never had it after that.
Yeah,
they never had it after.
Well, they also probably realized. I think the difference is maybe with that one is, I don't know if it was necessarily strategic to take it out, or it was a case of, not enough people actually use the backwards compatibility.
And I think that's why they don't care that PS5's only PS4. Because I think people say that they want that feature, but I don't think it's as used as much as they actually. No. Yeah.
In fact,
and then the other one. Yeah.
I was going to say I have a relatively limited number of friends that play PlayStation, like probably about, let's say, 5 or 6 in total. And none of them ever told me once that they've ever put a PS3 game on or considered playing it again. So there's just too much good stuff coming out. Plus, you get a lot of remakes, you get a lot of remasters. There's access to older games, like when Final Fantasy came out. I'm not talking about the most recent remake of number 7. I'm talking about the one before that. There was a remake of a remaster. What would you even call it? A higher resolution version of the original PlayStation title. And yes,
remaster.
you can still get access to those kind of games. It's a very niche, I think, capability for people that more for nostalgia's sake than anything else want to be able to go back and play one of those games. And I think a lot of it is they just want to, in the back of their mind, know that that option exists. Even if they'll never actually do it, they know that they could do it if they really wanted to.
Yeah. And just with the teardown, two other things. One is the user replaceable SSD.
Yeah,
which I'm actually a
cool.
huge fan of.
Fan, yeah.
Like, I'm not a big fan of having like a proprietary port at the back of
like
the
Xbox
Series X.
Yeah.
Well, it's cool from a consumer perspective because then anyone could do it. You just plug it in.
Yeah,
but I'd actually much prefer
is
the PlayStation version of it.
So what having that? Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, like you said, from a consumer's perspective, it's a lot easier. You go to the shop, you fork out. Well, in Australia, it's like $350 or something, isn't it, for 1 terabyte?
Which is like probably reasonable. I mean, it's a terabyte of
given
ultra fast.
Exactly.
SSD.
So given the type of drive that it is, yes. Given having a terabyte worth of space, you could get cheaper elsewhere. And if we're talking about games that require that level of performance, that's different to I'll just get a slightly slower SSD that will take longer to load, but probably not by a significant enough amount for me to justify, the price hike and having to pay $350 for a proprietary piece of hardware. So I don't know, but at the same time, having the flexibility is really good. Being able to open and go, hey, I can put in whatever drive I want, and you can get decent drives.
Well, I don't think it's whatever drive.
You know what I mean?
Like,
compared
to
having to go,
Sony hasn't been really clear on.
One.
Like, they haven't actually said here's the specs that you need to have for it to be compatible.
Yeah, but it's certainly more open than having a single piece of hardware that.
Well, it seems to be at this stage. I mean, this is also Sony, right? Like, don't forget all the stuff they've done in the past. Like, they've always tried to have their own, memory sticks and things like that. Yeah. And the Vita was probably the most infamous example.
Yeah, they had their own.
So, I don't put it past them that they sort of do some weird thing on the hardware and software side and say you have to have this specific branded version of the SSD.
It's possible, yeah. But I mean, given that it's an extension of, we'll see.
I think it's unlikely, and I hope they don't do that. Yeah. I think that would be a really big error on their part, because they might as well have made an external one the same.
Well, exactly,
Xbox Series X if they go down that path.
And I do wonder though, and I haven't read into this, whether they still support external, just for the easier option. Plug and play, use your existing drive.
They do. So both of them do. It's just that you can't use that external hard drive to have like next gen games on it.
Right. Interesting.
I think with both you can have PS4 games or Xbox One games.
Is that actually
on the external hard drives?
A hardware limitation, you think? Is there not enough bandwidth for those games? Or is it purely to force people to go and buy?
No, because if you think about it from a developer perspective, if you're, developing for the next gen, as part of the spec, the SSD is there. So you don't... There shouldn't be any requirement as a developer to check whether there is an SSD or whether it's a slower hard drive or whatever.
Plugged in, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the number one innovation of this generation. It's like every game that comes out on the PS5 and the Xbox Series, there's going to be an SSD on board. So you're going to do things differently.
It's a huge gain. I mean, I've been running most of my games off external SSDs on my consoles. So I have, on the Xbox, I'd have a 1 terabyte Samsung SSD that I plug in, and all the games go into that. And on...
Is it faster than the Xbox?
Yeah.
Like the native?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's way faster than the mechanical drive, first of all. Any SSD should, in theory, unless there's, other issues at play, be faster than loading stuff off the drive. But that used to be the case. I remember when there was USB support for the Xbox, and I don't remember if this went as far back as the Xbox 360. At one stage, it was actually faster to have games on a USB drive than it was to have it running off the internal drive. Now, obviously, because it's an SSD, I found games were just loading faster for me running off the external SSD. Yeah, so I had that for the PlayStation.
I didn't know if it was like limited. Yeah.
I mean, the problem is now it's also hard for me to compare because I've had those SSDs for quite a while now that I've never actually seen what the speed is like running off the normal drive. I don't think it's probably going to be significantly different, but I've been lucky enough, I guess, to be able to use those SSDs for a while. And I remember, going back to the not the last PC that I built, but the last proper major build that I did back in 2011 or something. When I switched over and started using SSDs for Windows, it was mind blowing how much faster everything was.
Yeah,
loading into it.
I think SSDs have been a massive innovation
huge.
in tech in general.
I mean, obviously, other than the given when the improvements in graphics card and all that hardware, having an SSD has been one of the biggest, if anything, a quality of life improvement. Just things being snappier, loading quicker. You don't have to sit there for 2 minutes while your OS boots, stuff like that. So
definitely
everything is SSD now.
And the last thing I just wanted to mention about this teardown, unless you had anything else, was the heatsink. And the heatsink to me is actually my number one thing that I love the most about it. The heatsink looks insane. It's just like, I love it because, they're going to make, what are they going to sell? Like 70 million, I reckon, is the minimum.
Yeah.
They're going to sell of these PlayStation 5s. And I would not be shocked if they go more than that. And then you look at it and you go, well, okay, they can engineer the hell out of it because they're going to mass produce it. And it just looks insane. Yeah. It looks so cool. It's like fitting every little crevice and space that they can. So many fins.
Absolutely amazing how they engineer these things. Like I said at the start, it blows me away. As someone who, I wouldn't call myself an enthusiast, but I do build my own PCs and stuff like that. I mucked around building multiple of them.
Yeah, I think it's an enthusiast.
It actually just blows me away, the engineering that goes behind designing those consoles. Absolutely amazing. The one thing that I found fascinating is I personally like the look of the PS5. It's sort of reminiscent of that Mass Effect-y, sci-fi sort of, not quite minimalistic, but I don't even know. There's probably a name for that particular type of design. But what I find interesting is how easy it seemed to be to rip the sides off. And it got me thinking from a thermal perspective, whether they're intentionally to some extent to guide airflow, or whether you're actually better off taking them off and running your console without them, just for better thermals. I don't know. I'd be interesting. Someone needs to do that. Someone needs to test that. Someone needs to.
No. I'm sure Digital Foundry are going to test that as one of their first things. Well, it seems like, I mean, there's been a lot of rumors about this, but it seems completely obvious that they'll have customizable faceplates.
Yeah.
I'm not that excited about that because they had that for the 360 and I really don't remember anyone being that into it. Like, I do know people that got them, but but it kind of looks a bit tacky, in my
it just never fit in. I mean, I don't know. Horses for courses, right? There's people who...
It's a bit goofy. It's a bit goofy as well.
It is, but it depends. It depends on, I guess, what you're into. So at least with me, up until, the most recent place that I just moved into where I didn't care as much, I like my things to match and be relatively minimalistic and clean and tidy. And it always felt out of place if I had a console in my cabinet that had all sorts of really, pictures on it and all sorts of tacky stuff.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's different demographics and different people who appreciate that, where the console is sort of the main showcase and they like to have that to look cool. And everything else is sort of secondary. They don't care if it doesn't match the cabinet or their TV or whatever.
And it does seem like, outside of obviously the next gen upgrades, that both manufacturers, Sony and Microsoft, are heavily focusing on making these things quiet, and really dealing as effectively as possible with the cooling, and that's partly why they're so large, because you need that large surface area to try to cool things down.
Absolutely.
So you must be happy about that, because I know that you were like crazy about the fan.
I care about two things I care about is obviously cooling and noise, and they tend to not. They go hand in hand, but they tend to be polar opposites a lot of the time. You want good cooling, chuck in a lot of fans, they're going to make a lot of noise. It's going to annoy the hell out of you. So it's always a balancing act. But again, I'm amazed at the fact that they get all that performance out of what is relatively minimal cooling. I mean, if I compare my PC to what they have, my PC has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... 6, 7 fans, in 8 if I had a motherboard that also had a fan for the chipset. to cool down. 8 fans potentially to cool this thing down. So, and you look at the PlayStation, you know, it's crazy how they get all that cooling down with so much less airflow in fans. But hopefully, especially with the PlayStation specifically, I've got a PS4 Pro, and everyone knows there are noisy consoles. Even if you don't have dust in them or anything, you know, from day one, you can hear that thing wind up, and it's just crazy as. My PC is way more quiet compared to that. Especially, the PC that I built for my girlfriend uses an air cooler, and then my one has water cooling. And I run custom fan curves and everything, so it's generally pretty quiet. If I'm doing heavy workloads like editing, it ramps up, but it's still fairly reasonable, I would say. And I think from a PC, you kind of expect that. But from a console that's sitting somewhere next to your TV, there's a level of quietness that I think people do expect as well.
Well, all reports are so definitely with the hands-on with the Series X, everyone's saying it's very, very quiet. With the PlayStation 5, you know, most people who have had face-to-face hands-on, they haven't had it at their home or anything, but have all said it's like whisper quiet, like you can barely hear it.
That's really cool.
So was there anything else from the teardown that you wanted to mention?
Not really. I think those were the main things that I was thinking about as well.
All right. Well, we'll go on to our next topic, which is we're fully becoming a PC podcast at the moment with you coming on board.